You've lived a great life and done well for yourself. But what mark will you leave on the world? How will you inspire future generations? Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand have helped thousands of people answer exactly those questions. If you've ever wondered, what will be my legacy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast. Now, here are your hosts, Stan and Katie Beth.
Welcome back to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your hosts, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today is renowned patient advocate, author, speaker, and philanthropist, Rhonda Nelson. Rhonda, thank you so much for taking time to join us today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. We are so excited. I have so many different topics I want to cover today. So we'll dive right in. But I wanted to start, if you could give our listeners just a little bit about kind of your background and what experiences really led you into doing the work that you do today.
I met my husband in 1999. We married in 2000. And at the beginning of 2001, I came down with what I thought was a cold. And I just could not get better. And it was a very long journey to figure out that it wasn't a cold. And it morphed into, like I said, what felt like was a cold, then into just these crazy random anaphylactic reactions and not really knowing what caused that. I'd never had asthma before as a child. I really had not even battled allergies of any sort. So on that journey, you learn a lot about advocating for yourself, and especially when it's a rare disease that you're diagnosed with. And that's what really started the whole passion, what just lit my fire about patient advocacy, because I feel like so many people walk that same path, not only just with my disease, but with a lot of diseases, and they don't really know how to advocate for themselves. And it's not really a difficult thing, but I think it's something that we just kind of take for granted. Oh, you go to the doctor, you listen to what the doctor says, and you move on. And I found that was not the case. And had I not been very persistent, I honestly don't know how long it would have taken me to get a diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that patient advocacy is so important, really, in all health-related issues, to at least be out there advocating for yourself, really paying attention to those choices that are being made, not just letting choices be made for you. But I feel like our medical system here in the States is really a medical system that they put you on a little path and that's where you go. And a lot of people don't realize that they can get a second opinion. They can stop and ask more questions. They can do their own research. I imagine that would be particularly important for, as you mentioned, things like what you were struggling with that are more rare. I have type 1 diabetes, which is by no means particularly rare. It's the more rare form of diabetes, not the one super, prevalent in American culture. But I know even just my experience with that, I get a lot of medical advice and recommendations that I know, as a person who keeps myself alive every day, is not good medical advice. I would imagine that would be even more true, the need to advocate and do your own research with things like what you had that are really rare. How did you go about finding all of that information? How did you go about learning how to advocate for what you needed?
So first, let me just back up a little bit and I'll share with your listeners. I have we refer to it as AERD, which is Aspirin Exacerbated Respiratory Disease. And that's really it's got three components. It's someone that has asthma and nasal polyps and chronic sinusitis and rhinitis. And then the third component is the sensitivity to aspirin and NSAIDs, which are non-anti-inflammatory steroids, which basically, in simple terms, those are the things that we buy over the counter: the Aleve, the Motrin, the just regular aspirin and things like that. So yes, back 20 some odd years ago when I came down with these symptoms, it wasn't very well known. It was often misdiagnosed. And a lot of times the answer was to throw a steroid at it, like prednisone, which creates its own problems. So, I think what I really learned quickly was you can't be afraid to ask questions. You can't be afraid to question what you're being told, even though it is by a physician or your medical team or whatever. Asking questions is not a crime. And we have to do that in order to make the right decisions for ourselves and for our treatment. And I think a lot of times we as patients are scared to do that, because I know my age group and older, we were always taught what the doctor says or what the physician says is basically correct. You do it, you don't ask questions, end of story. And that's not really the case, especially when you're dealing with something that's not well known, because back when I was diagnosed, a lot of physicians didn't even know what it was. And I know many times I was on the road with my husband and I would go into an anaphylactic shock situation and I'd be taken to the emergency room and they would have no idea what I was talking about when I told them what I had. So it just is very, very important that you do your own research, you understand your condition, and that you prioritize what is important to you and what your most important concerns are when you are meeting with your medical doctor or your medical team, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, for sure. So as a patient advocate, how does that work? What does that really look like?
Well, so I just really educate people on the importance of being a patient advocate for themselves. And whether it's guiding them now, mainly I'm on the board of Allergy Asthma Network, and I do a lot of work. And one of the big things that organization does is patient advocacy, which what that looks like is we are advocating for all kinds of bills that come up in that need to be passed and things like that. So I'm constantly in support of those things. I'm helping people understand why those bills are important, whatever they may be. So Allergy Asthma Network, there's a lot of conditions that sit under that umbrella, AERD being one of them. So I don't just advocate for AERD patients. It's kind of across the board. But on the other side of that coin, I also spend a lot of time talking to and sharing and helping guide AERD patients through just the myriad of things that there are. There's a lot of biologics that are relatively new for AERD, and navigating, getting your insurance to cover those. While I am not an expert on that, I've certainly dealt with it multiple times with various biologics for my own self, that where I can send patients to the places that they need to go to get the information that they need or the tools that they need to understand whatever issue whether it's how to work with their insurance company or whether it's to understand why they need that treatment versus a different treatment. So that's what that really looks like.
That's great. I love that you kind of work both sides of patient advocacy. So you're working the political side on that end of things, and then you're also trying to get laws and things changed and made better. And then you're also working, I think, probably the most important work, working with those patients, getting them connected with the tools and resources that they need to function. I know battling insurance, there's nothing more frustrating in the world than trying to battle insurance for something that you know that you need. And a lot of people that I talk to don't realize that they can really do that. They let insurance dictate their medical care. And again, I think that's just part of the system that we have here in the States. So people like you being out there and educating them that they can really make a difference and sort of choose their own path through this system, I think is really, really cool. So I appreciate the work that you do on that. And then beyond that, you do so many different things to help people. You also, I noticed you serve as a voice in the foster care system. And then so I want to talk kind of about that a little bit. And then I also want to talk a little bit in a minute about encouraging women, how you encourage women kind of to reinvent themselves. And I want to touch a little bit on the book you wrote as well. So tell us a little bit about the work you do with the foster care system and kind of what your background on that is.
So here where I live in Tennessee, I live in Williamson County, and I sit on one of the foster care review boards that we have. And basically what that is, really in a very quick nutshell, we listen to everyone that is involved in the case. We get updates from everyone, including the children. And we then will make recommendations to the court about the case. Everyone in the case is represented, whether it's the children that may have a guardian ad litem or an attorney, whether it's the parent, the bio parents, the foster parents come, they represent themselves. And then we have the various organizations that are walking the child, in the system. And we hear from all of them. Some of these kids have CASAs as well. We hear from them. And while each one of those entities or individuals' main goal is the best interest of the child, it's human nature for each one of those entities to really be concerned just about what their part of that situation is. And so foster care, as part of the Foster Care Review Board, we take all of it into consideration. And the only person that we really look out for the best interest of is the child. So we are able to neutrally look at every piece of that puzzle and make recommendations. Now, I have to say, not all cases have, come before Foster Care Review Board. It is, there's well, I've lost my train of thought, but the judge will put it to the Foster Care Review Board. So, when I was in Arizona, I was on 2 boards out of multiple boards. And there's just, when I moved from Arizona 2 years ago, there were, in Maricopa County alone, there were 13,000 kids in foster care system. You cannot possibly have a foster care review board for every one of those cases. So like I said, not every case goes before foster care review board, but there are cases that need to be dealt with in or have that kind of neutral party, I should say. And it's just really a passion of mine. I feel like the foster care system doesn't really get as much light, if you will, as a lot of other causes or other organizations. And we have a lot of kids that are sadly in the system, some of them until they age out. They don't have the luxury of having parents. And it's just something that touched my heart a long time ago, and I'm super passionate about it.
No, I love it. And I wanted to focus on that. Stan knows this background about me. 3 of our kids are adopted and they had an attorney ad litem. And so we know just a touch about this process, but I have such a heart for foster care and for the child advocates and the ad litem attorneys and the judges and the people that play a role in the lives of these children who really, to some degree with these younger ones can't speak for themselves. And our kids absolutely loved the team that they had. Our ad litem attorney, she was wonderful. They loved visiting with her. She brought them stickers and it was a treat. And I just felt like I wanted to highlight that because it really does take a special person to really work in this field, kind of in any aspect, working in the foster care system, because it's hard. That's hard work. And our story, of course, is happy, and they ended happy, and we're one big happy family, and they're adopted and all the good things happen. But, it was, even with a happy ending, it's a really emotional job that you guys do. So I did just want to highlight that amongst all of the other things that you're doing, you're also out there advocating for kids as well, which I really appreciate.
And the other thing too is, especially with the caseworkers and sometimes with the attorneys that are appointed, and what they come and go in these children's lives. And sometimes these kids are in the system so long that there is a constant revolving door. So I was a CASA before I was on Foster Care Review Board. And, a lot of times the CASA or, as crazy as it sounds, the Foster Care Review Board are the most constant people that are in those children's lives for a period of time. And so that, to me, just offering that stability. I kid you not, almost every single month when I leave that building, I cry because some of the, it's not always sad tears. I do want to make that, because there are a lot of happy cases, but there are a lot of cases that will just absolutely simply break your heart.
Right. Right. Well, we appreciate the work that you do on that. Okay,
Thank
I told you I had a lot of different
Okay.
tracks I was going to take you down, so just buckle up. Stan's used to my brain firing randomly like this. Okay, so the other topic that I wanted to cover today, the topic of the motivational speaking that you do and the work that you do through kind of the empowering midlife women's happiness and the different speaking events you do. And then I want to talk about the book you wrote as well. But tell us a little bit about the work that you do for women.
So I have to go back and give a little bit of backstory of how this came along. Like I said, I met my husband in 1999. He's the lead singer and bass player for Little River Band, and he's been with them 45 years this year, which is crazy to me. It's the band's 50th anniversary. So
Your music is fly, though, by the way.
thank you. Thank you. I couldn't be more proud of the work that he does. But that brought me to kind of how this all came about as we, 25 years ago when we got married. I was young and I was doing a lot of things and whatever, I felt confident in who I was, and I had my foot in a lot of different ponds, if you will. But as I started to hit middle age, I didn't want to be just the wife of, or known as just the wife of, because while I am honored to be that, and it is a huge part of my life, I am also Rhonda, who does a lot of different things. And I was privy to see, and especially in the entertainment industry, how women, especially once we got to a certain age, were a little cast aside because we were of that age, if you will. And it really started to annoy me because, number one, I had reinvented myself many times and done many things. And I, to this day, continue to do that. And I've just felt the importance of people, women, knowing that just because we are in midlife does not mean that we are done. Maybe we are done with a particular career, maybe we're done raising our children, or maybe we're done caregiving for our parents. Whatever it is, there's still more. We're still a viable part of society, and we still have more to give. And that's how it really all started. And then just from there, I, especially being out on the road and talking to fans and listening to them, because the band's demographic is really middle age. And just listening to the women, I heard so many women say the one common thing that I heard, and I would always say to Wayne, I hear it almost nightly. Women will say, "Oh, I'm too old to do that." And I just wanted to tell them, and then to dream you are not too old to go for your dreams, and to just keep going. And so that's how it really started. And from there, it just, I started doing people would ask me to speak at little events, and it just kind of started rolling on its own. And I really do think that middle-aged women are partly just put aside. And I think society's doing a better job of realizing what we still have to offer to society. But 20 years ago, we were old. I mean, I remember thinking that my mom at 50 was old, like super old. And how wrong now I can say that I was.
Yes, the older that I get, I'll be 39 in May this year. The older that I get, the younger everybody feels, because I'm the same way. I remember when my mom was 40 and I was like, well, she's lived a good life. She's lived, and it's that perspective. When you're young, when you're in your teenagers, everybody, and my kids would tell you that. They're like, oh, my mom, she's super old. And I'm like, hey, now listen, but it's that perspective that you have when you're young. I do think it's the work that you do is really important, because I do feel like our society really starts to marginalize people, women, obviously in particular, but men as well. The older they get, it's like value diminishes instead of really looking at getting older as these people are the people with the wealth of experiences and the wisdom and the knowledge, and they've seen the world build up and change over the course of a lifetime, and they've adapted with it. Like, instead of looking at people aging as a great thing and as a great resource, I feel like we tend to really marginalize people as they tend to get older, and that's very painful for me to watch, obviously, because I am also not getting, well, we're all getting older, I guess, by the minute. But as you know, I really I don't ever want to hit that phase of life like you were talking about, Rhonda, where I sit down one day and say, well, I'm too old to do that. I'm too old to learn that thing. I'm too old to try that new thing. And so I love that you're out there with that voice, letting women know you're not too old. You still have a great amount of value. You can always learn a new skill or donate your time, or there's so many different ways that you can continue to grow and be a lifelong learner making an impact. Stan, what are your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I know that I have a calendar age that makes me at least technically older than both of you. So I, I continue to echo the same theme, which is every year I get older, I think, wait, that's not that old anymore. It was once upon a time, it was really old, but now it's not so old. And I feel like, gosh, why would I take myself out of the game? Because I'm better at it than I've ever been. I know more. All those mistakes I've made are so useful to me now. Why would I waste the opportunity to not deploy those in some useful, productive way? So, but we've talked about a lot of things here, and this could take a lot longer than that 30 minutes, Katie Beth, that we were talking about on the front end of this. But I want to go back to one thing in particular. I have a couple things I want to explore with you here in the time we have remaining. One is the foster care issue. I'm pretty familiar with that, not just as a lawyer, but also from some of the situations I've seen in my own family. I'm really curious. You've worked to influence legislation. I'm really curious to hear your answer to my question. And my question is, if I handed you my magic wand and I said, Rhonda, I want to give you the ability to wave this wand and make one or two or three changes, fundamental changes to the system of the way foster care is handled, what would those changes be?
I'm not gonna be popular with this answer, but this is something that I've seen for years, and it literally drives many of us crazy. Family reunification is always the goal. It always is what the goal starts out to be, unless there's a circumstance that doesn't allow, whether it's, death or something like that. But family reunification is that goal. Now, it varies from state to state and a little bit from judge to judge how long they will tolerate a bio parent, you know, not doing what they're supposed to do to get their children back. And, you know, I have to say, I think Tennessee's better at this than Arizona was, but it's still a problem. I think that after bio parents have shown that they're only just doing enough and barely enough to get the time frame extended a little bit more, after about 12, 18 months, probably at the most, we need to start looking at what is really best for that child. And is that letting that child dangle in foster care because we want to continue to let the bio parent or parents, only do just marginally what's necessary and then let that clock start ticking all over again? Because that leaves the kid at a really bad spot because they don't get to have a permanency situation.
Right, in that bad spot. And I don't know much about this, but I did have a client not too many years ago who adopted a child who had been bounced around from one foster home to another. And that child developed a condition, and there's apparently a name for that condition. And the result was that as she got older, she was like 18 at the time I was engaged in all this. She had repeated suicide attempts, severe depression, and apparently, from what I understood, it doesn't get better. It only gets worse. And all that's caused because she had made a connection with foster parents and then had been ripped away from them and put with another foster set of foster parents that she made a connection with, and then she was ripped away from them. And after having that happen a few times, it created this condition that for
Was
which there
it
was no
reactive
cure.
attachment disorder, RAD? Was that it?
It may have been that, yes,
Mm-hmm.
but I would think that the risk of having that occur and the implications, the consequences of that on the child are so horrific
Mhm.
that I would think the bias should be in favor of getting that child re-situated into a permanent situation with a permanent family rather than having them hang out there in suspended animation for some extended period of time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's one change. Any others that I mean, I'm giving, you have the magic wand right
I'm
now.
not I'm not going to be popular with this one either, but I feel like our caseworkers need to be their job needs to be respected. We need to pay them more because their job is incredibly hard, and we need to be able to figure out how in the system to not have to have more people who want to do that job and to not have the burnout that is there because they're so overloaded, which creates a revolving door of caseworkers in the each case, which is not good for the child. It's not good across the board, but again, that's a whole nother situation that is really hard to undo. But the simple answer is we need more caseworkers and they need to be paid better.
Okay.
I feel the same way about teachers as well. But I don't want to stand on my soapbox too long about that. But
No,
I think
well,
it would go a long way in helping the cases be a lot better.
I gave you three wishes.
So if there's one more, if I
Is there one
have one
more?
more, what would I do? I'll tell you the other thing. We need to have a better system for group homes. I mean, there are situations where, we are just severely lacking in group homes, and there's situations where kids can't necessarily go into foster homes. They need to be in specific kind of treatment homes, and we need to have a good supply of those places to send these kids when they need the help so that they can get the help that they need.
Yeah,
Those would be my three.
I agree with that assessment. Here in Arkansas, they are doing some overhaul on that. The problem is, and you know this because it's true everywhere, in the foster care system, there are so many moving parts to it, so many different pieces of legislation that are out there, so many different groups advocating for different things. So it's so hard to make any sort of huge change and huge progress in the foster care system. We all know that it's overloaded. We all know most of us probably know that caseworkers aren't being paid enough, and the people doing this work, there's not enough foster parents, and there's so much work that needs to be done on the foster care system. So I appreciate everyone who has a heart for that and is willing to foster children and adopt children and support the families that are going through that. It's such important work, and it's everywhere. It's every state that it's a problem.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, is there anything we didn't cover today that you would like our listeners to know about? You can stand on another soapbox if you want to.
No, I don't think so. But I did want to back up to when we were talking about midlife and things like that. The other thing that is just, Wayne, my husband, turns 75 this year, and he's still out there. Right now, there's 93 shows booked for the year, and new shows are coming in every single day. And I have people tell me all the time, man, he's 70, he's going to be 75, really? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just a testament to that whole age thing. And like Stan said, why would you want to, or why do we feel that because we are a chronological number that we don't have more to give. And so I just, it's another, he and I will sometimes do speaking things together and really hone in on that, because I feel like it's important for people to not just go sit in a recliner in the golden years, as they say.
Yes,
Good
I
for
agree
you.
with that assessment. Yeah. And I know that Stan agrees with that assessment. We talk all the time about the fact that we still have so much important work to do. And so we get better at the work that we do every day. There's more wisdom that we gain, even the mistakes that we make. I've learned more probably from the mistakes that I've made in my life than I have from the things that turned out to be great successes. And so having a lifetime of that is, I think, an invaluable resource that I hope we can kind of turn the tide on that and really change that perspective where people appreciate the wisdom and the knowledge and the background that comes from adding more and more years.
So
Absolutely.
let's mention we got to mention the book.
Yes, let's do mention the book before we run out of time. So, during all of this, you wrote a book that looks so good. I know it's available on Amazon. It's called A Different Life. Tell us about A Different Life and what readers can expect from that.
I will say, first of all, it's not a difficult read and it's not a juicy tell-all. I wanted it to be a book to share what mine and Wayne's life is like, who we really are, what we really do, because I feel sometimes that when you are connected to a quote unquote celebrity status, whatever level that may be, people assume certain things. They assume you don't have the same problems as them, or that you don't understand the hardships and things like that. And I wanted people to really see who we are and what we stand for. And so the book it just starts from the beginning. It's one chapter is about me, the next chapter is about him, the next chapter is about the band, and then how we came together and the things we do, not only just the fun and crazy things we do, but also all of the work we do for various organizations to raise awareness and raise money for them. And in between there, because music and food are two universal languages of the world, I interspersed old family recipes from the band. So it really is a coffee table book, but it has a really good story. And then it also has some fun recipes. I will say most of the recipes aren't very healthy because there are a lot of very old family recipes and things like that. But there
And
are some.
we talked about this earlier, old Southern recipes too. Like with Stan and I don't
Absolutely.
judge because we are both from the South. And so, if it doesn't have a ton of butter and sugar in it, it's
That's
not a
right.
family recipe that has come from my family for
That's
sure.
right.
For
I
sure.
have threatened to take, especially some of the sweets in there, and redo them and get them right as, more healthy, gluten-free, less sugar, or use something other than just pure white sugar to make them sweet. So who knows? Maybe that's down the line. I have several other things that I'm working on to launch this year, and so that is one thing. And I do plan to do whether it's an ebook or an addition to that book, but to close out the story, if you will, for Little River Band and the 50th anniversary.
That's awesome.
Cool.
That is what a great time and what an incredible anniversary to be able to celebrate as a band. I don't know what the statistics are, but I would imagine the bands that make it to a 50-year anniversary, I imagine that percentage is very, very small. So what an achievement. And it's so cool that you have been a huge part of that. And I can't wait for the supplemental addition to the book. That'll be great.
It's a big year. It's the band's 50th, his 45th in the band, his 75th birthday, and our 25th wedding anniversary. So
This is a big
it's a big
year.
year. Yes,
And 93
absolutely.
speaking and 93 concerts already booked on top of that. And so
Yes,
you guys, you don't have any free time. We've got
we
to end the
don't.
podcast because you've got other stuff to go to. Well, we really, really appreciate you. And for our listeners, we appreciate you as well. Thank you for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with your host, Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. Our guest today was Rhonda Nelson. And to connect with Rhonda, you can visit rhondabnelson.com. We'll link that for you in the show notes. And you can also connect with her on Instagram and Facebook. Rhonda, we really do appreciate all of the work that you do. And of course, thank you so much for making time to join us today.
Thank you guys so much. It was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Your Life, Your Legacy podcast with Stan Miller and Katie Beth Hand. If you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more about Stan and Katie Beth, go to pinnaclelegacylaw.com. You can also find links in the show notes.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.